Good afternoon, students. So, may I give you some sample problems regarding projectile motion. So, ito yung mga important formulas natin for projectile motion. One for the x component and one for the y component. So, remember, don't forget what happens when we talk about the projectile motion. The things that you need to remember is that the velocity on the x-axis is constant, and since it's constant, there's no acceleration. The only acceleration that happens in a projectile motion is the acceleration in the y-axis. So the only acceleration is the acceleration due to gravity. So let's try to solve some sample problems. But before that, I just want to remind you regarding the concept. So remember, meron akong tatlong instance na binigay, no, yung isang situation is tinapon mo yung object without angle, no? So kapag sinabing without angle, the only velocity is just the x component. So angle is equals to 0. So at this point, there is no initial velocity in the y-axis, no? The initial velocity y is 0. However, you need to remember that the velocity, the Vox, it will be constant, and Voy, as it hits the ground, the velocity will increase. So pagdating dito, we have the maximum value of the velocity on the y. So kahawig yan nung kapag nung nag-discuss tayo regarding free fall. So another thing is kapag tinapan mo upwards with certain angle, no, and the final position is also the initial position. So things that you need to remember in this kind of problems. So since may angle, meron tayong, siyempre may initial velocity tayo. So meron tayong initial velocity and meron din tayong initial velocity sa y. So we have Vox and Voy. Then, things that you need to remember, yung x component dito. So kunwari ito yung initial velocity mo. So you have the x component, Vox, and you have the y component. So you need to be particular nasan yung angle mo, no? So kung nandito yung angle, so you can use a Vox is equals to the initial velocity cosine theta. Then the velocity on the y is the initial velocity sine theta. Kapag nandito yung angle, but you need to remember that it depends upon the angle, okay? So as you hit it, syempre, upwards with a certain velocity, it will reach the highest point. So dun sa highest point, the velocity here is equals to 0. Bago siya tumigil, pagkatapos niya tumigil, di ba, babalik siya papunta sa ground since nag-accelerate siya ng negative 9.8 meters per square second. So pagtigil niya dito, ang mangyayari dun sa velocity natin on the y-axis, it will start to increase in magnitude. So pagdating dito, nandito yung maximum velocity on the y-axis. So, ang nangyayari doon, sa x component naman, the Vox all throughout will be the velocity since walang acceleration. So, ang velocity dito, remind ko lang, the velocity on the y ang zero. So, pagdating naman sa x component, at this point, meron tayong initial velocity on the x pagdating dito. Then, what will happen as it follow the trajectory, the velocity on the x-axis doesn't change. So, pagdating sa highest point, yung x component, Vx is equals to the initial velocity x. So, pagdating dito sa highest point, hindi natin pwedeng sabihin na walang velocity because there's still velocity here. Hindi yan tumitigil lang. But the only velocity at this point, the velocity is equals to the velocity on the x component. Clear? So the magnitude of the y component here, the VOY, is the same as the magnitude here. Nagkaiba lang ng direction. So another reminder, what if the other situation that you can encounter is yung delta y is not 0. So dito, actually same lang din naman yung nangyayari. Ang pagkakaiba lang dito, tinapan mo yung object at a certain initial velocity with the angle. So, it's either merong angle or walang angle. The displacement is not 0 already. So, in solving this, you can just use yung masosolve mo yung time papunta dito. Then, we're in the final velocity on the y is 0. Then, you can find the time as it hits the ground since nag-accelerate lang din yun using the acceleration due to gravity. So, same concept. Ang nagbabari lang dito is yung delta y is not 0. Pwede rin mo rin itapon yan. Kunwari, tinapon mo naman pababa. No? Ganun. So, meron ka initial velocity. So, mali yung drawing ko. Ulit. So, meron ka initial velocity. Tinapon mo pababa. So, yung angle mo is not 0. But your angle is negative theta, no? So, kunwari, tinapon mo yan, pababa dito, with the initial velocity. So, yung initial velocity mo is in negative angle. So, negative theta. So, isang example niyan, kunwari, kapag i-drawing mo yung vector, this is your initial velocity. So, you have negative angle kasi tinapon mo pababa. So, but my tip is always look for the placement of the angle. Kasi yun yung magde-determine whether you will use sine, cosine, or tangent if you will find the angle. Okay, so quick recall regarding the projectile motion.